In this video, we're going to talk about the repository used to configure PowerShell Universal. So most of the configuration settings inside PowerShell Universal are stored within PS1 files. PS1 files that are then stored within the repository. Within the PowerShell Universal admin console, you can actually view the files in the repository by going to Settings/Configurations. Inside here, you'll find things like authentication, dashboards, endpoints, environments, licenses, published folders, etc. Whenever you configure something in the admin console, it actually generates PowerShell script that is kind of the single source of truth for the PowerShell Universal configuration. So if I click into one of these, you're going to see that I have a new PSU dashboard command being called, and it has all the configuration options for my dashboard. If I were to actually go to my dashboards page, you're going to see that the dashboard settings are the same there as they are inside that configuration file. And the reason that is because we're using that configuration file to define how PowerShell Universal works. So if I come in here, what I can actually do is edit this directly. So we kind of have a code first way of editing PowerShell Universal. So now if I save that, it saves the changes, and I can go to my dashboards page, and you can see now authentication has been disabled because I removed the parameter in the PS1 file. So similarly, you can actually edit those files directly on disk. If you're running PowerShell Universal locally and just kind of like an development environment, you can actually go into the default repository directory, which is C, Program Data, Universal Automation, Repository. And you can see here, these are all the files that are used to configure PowerShell Universal. The files that you see inside the repository editor inside the admin console are the files in this .universal folder. So we have dashboards, endpoints, environments, licenses, published folders, etc. There are other files that have been generated as well. One for our dashboard script, which is actually, if we click details here, you'll see that this is the dashboard contents. And there are also scripts for each one of our scripts. So we have a pi.ps1 and a variables.ps1 that are both residing inside this repository directory. And then based on like any folder usage or whatnot, you may have different structures inside here. So you can actually come into Visual Studio Code, for example, and edit those files directly like you saw me do inside the repository editor. So if I wanted to authenticate again, I can turn on authenticated, save that dashboard. It's running as a service, that's why I have to pop this up. And it's actually going to update that dashboard based on the setting I just changed. So this is kind of twofold. The fact that we have these PS1 files that you can edit directly kind of makes it faster to develop certain things. Additionally, you can store all your configuration files in a version control system like Git. So we actually have Git integration, and we have a lecture on that, so you can check that out. But then you could store all these files in Git. You could have a development environment where you're developing them, check them in, and then the production environment would pull them out and update the files locally, which would then change the settings. So that's kind of how the repository works and where it's located. A lot of people do want to change the repository directory, so there's actually a configuration option to do so. If you go into your app settings.json file, so I'm actually opening the one in program files x86 universal app settings.json, and this is kind of our default template of app settings.json file features, and you're going to find inside data repository path the actual path that we're defining for the repository, and that's kind of where that default path is coming from. So you can actually change this. If you do move it, do note that you have to move your configuration files to that new location if you have generated some. And one thing I would definitely recommend is not to use this app settings JSON file directly. Rather use it as reference. The one that you're going to want to actually use is located in, or it's not located, you can create it in Program Data / PowerShell Universal. You can see here I have this JSON file created. It has a subset of my settings. In this case, I'm using my HTTPS settings. But you could also take your repository settings and move them over into this updated JSON file. So now that would set my repository directory to somewhere else. Like I could change this to repository 1, 2, 3, and then restart my PowerShell Universal service, and it will change that repository directory to there. And that's where my configuration files will be stored. So in this video, we talked about the repository directory and how we use PowerShell scripts to configure PowerShell Universal.